Evening, Matt.
Hey, Bill.
How you doing?
I'm doing great, and we've got some breaking news in Twitter world here.
It's rare that our the Weekend Blog feature has breaking news to share, but you are, if you didn't quite break it yourself, but you're just like a half step behind the breaking.
Yeah, which is not a bad place to be because the pioneers take the arrows, you know. So, and actually, let me give some props out. There was a blogger, as far as I know, a liberal blogger who blogs at tblogging.net, actually broke this story simply by following the Twitter feeds of conservatives. And I was interacting with this lady today on Twitter, and she said that it sort of, you know, gives her an upset stomach to follow conservatives, but she does it, and it paid off for her to keep an eye on the other side today. Because remember, a few weeks ago, I think we were talking about, or maybe it was Rachel Sklar, we were talking about how conservatives were dominating Twitter, and Bill Butler at the Next Right was arguing that it's because of hashtags, that conservatives were more adept at using hashtags than liberals were. As everybody knows, hashtags are essentially a way to make your blog searchable on a particular topic. So, like right now, a lot of people are doing pound swine flu, and so if you're looking for people tweeting about swine flu, you can search, you know, that hashtag and you'll find it. So conservatives had come up with pound TCOT, which stands for Top Conservatives on Twitter. And it was actually put together by two guys, one Rob Nappel, I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. He used to be NZ Bear, who was a prominent conservative blog called The Truth Laid Bare. He's like an internet consultant. He developed
the original blog ecosystem where people used to go and see how blogs were ranked in traffic.
Yes, that's right.
Both by page views and by links that they got. That was sort of the main, you know, Casey Kasem top 40 in the blogosphere for a long time.
And the cool thing, and that sort of plays right into TCOT, because Top Conservatives on Twitter was not only a way for us to tag it so that things that conservatives wrote would be searchable, but it was also actually a listing. So you could sign up, register as a conservative Twitterer, and it would rank you. So, for example, I think Newt Gingrich or Karl Rove is probably the top right now conservative on Twitter, and you're ranked based on, initially it was just how many followers you had, and then I think they started to break it out into a couple other categories. Now,
was Meghan McCain allowed on TCOT?
I don't think she was. I've not been on there in a while, but I do not believe she was. She may have chosen not to. You had to register and then be allowed on. Now, is it Neppel, do you know, or Nappel?
I don't know.
I've actually had lunch with Rob and talked to him before, and I should know this, but his partner in this was a guy named Michael Patrick Leahy, not to be confused with Neil Patrick Harris, apparently.
Oh, the teasing he must have got in conservative high school.
That's right. Now, the funny thing is that Rob has been around for a long time, and he was very known within the conservative world. And as I found happen in the blogosphere a lot, Michael Patrick Leahy essentially came out of nowhere. And this happens in the blog world, that you'll have people all of a sudden become very prominent, never heard of them before. At least for me, that's how Michael Patrick Leahy was. Well, whatever the case was, Rob and Michael have had a falling out. Rob took down the Top Conservatives on Twitter website, and they've been fighting it out on Twitter. They've actually been arguing on Twitter, and the latest thing that I saw today was Michael was pledging to put the website back up, and Rob is essentially arguing that that would be breaking their deal or their contract somehow. So we'll have to see how this plays out, but the TPM was probably the largest liberal blog to pick up on it, and they wrote a nice piece about this as well.
Brian Butler.
I'm not sure who wrote it. Bill Butler wrote the Next Right
Bill.
piece. So there's another Brian.
Yeah,
that's just an interesting name.
I might be mispronouncing the last names, but I think their last names are spelled the same.
Oh wow, that's interesting. Considering I've never in my life known another Butler. But anyway, it's a good piece at TPM. It obviously takes pot shots at conservatives, but they were right there with the scoop along with the other liberal blog. Again,
is this no more than just two guys who had some sort of personal, spat, or is there some larger significance to the fact that there are a lot of conservatives on TCOT. Does this impact, conservative online organizing, or is this a vacuum that would get filled up, in 24 hours because of the nature of the internet?
No, the good news is that nobody can control a hashtag. So we can keep tweeting pound hashtag, pound TCOT, as I'm sure we will. And it may be one of those things that, like, 10 years from now, nobody remembers exactly why we're doing it, but we are. So the good news is that conservatives who are on Twitter can still identify themselves as such. And there are other, like, if you're talking about Rush Limbaugh, there's Pound Rush. Hugh Hewitt Radio Show has Pound HHRS. Smart Girl Politics, Pound SGP. So there's several different sort of conservative hashtags, but this is by far the most prominent. It's been referenced numerous times, by media covering conservatives on Twitter. I think more than anything, it's two guys who couldn't get along, and they had some sort of a business arrangement that went awry. There's also the chance this is a huge publicity stunt, like a radio show. In fact, I pitched this idea at Town Hall. They didn't go for it, that I should be suspended for something, for blogging. And we could play the whole thing up, have people, like, write in, get Matt back on the blog.
Can you explain this to me? Because I really don't understand. In conservative organizing, in conservative blogging, does having the TCOT hashtag have any meaning? Do you actually use this in a way beyond actually tacking onto your own Twitter posts? Do you actually use it in your daily reading? Does anyone really use this sort of thing?
Yes, they do. And in fact, if you want to get followed, if you want a lot of people to follow you, and I found this to be very true, the more hashtags you put in your tweets, the more people you will have that find you and follow you. So people literally will sit there and search for Pound TCOT, and they will make that essentially their Twitter feed. There are people who, Hugh Hewitt Radio Show has a huge following of people who they will do, hashtag HHRS, Hugh Hewitt Radio Show, and they'll ignore everybody else, and they'll just read that. They'll put it into the search, and that essentially becomes the Twitter feed that they're reading. So yes,
because there is a parallel on the left. There is Top Prog, but I put on my Twitter post, but I don't think it does anything.
Well, I can tell you from personal experience that whenever I discover a new hashtag and I start using it, my followers go up. People start following me. They're finding me because they've been following that hashtag. So it is interesting.
Now, does this spat? Do you think it has any relevance towards the general? Maybe this is a segue into some of the blogging around the Specter switch.
It is,
does it say anything about the state of the conservative movement today and the difficulty in being coordinated?
Yeah, it's pathetic. I mean, we're fighting over hashtags, and it's no longer just the sort of liberal, moderate, liberal, conservative split. I mean, and we had today, today in the last couple days, conservative bloggers engaging in sort of the same thing about Arlen Specter versus the Club for Growth. And again, it's interesting because, there are people like David Frum who are so-called conservatives, but nobody really believes they're conservatives. So that's not really a newsworthy story. But when you have Ramesh Ponnuru and Eric Erickson, Ramesh over at the Corner National Review, and Eric Erickson, both prominent conservative bloggers, getting into a spat, albeit a polite disagreement, but a fight nonetheless, over Specter, it's very interesting.
What was their disagreement?
Okay, their disagreement was basically over Arlen Specter and the state of the Club for Growth. Basically, Ramesh wrote a piece called The Club for Shrinkage, which initially reminds me of George Costanza on Seinfeld. But it also reminds me of Mike Huckabee's calling them the Club for Greed. And Ramesh essentially argues that the Club for Growth has caused us to have more Democrats in Congress, and that Specter will now move to the left. Eric Erickson sort of caught him on it.
From Eric Erickson from Red State.
From Red State, yeah. Both of these guys
was blogging at National Review.
At the corner, yeah, National Review. Now, both of these guys are prominent bloggers. Both of these guys are, hardcore conservatives. I don't think anybody would question their conservatism. So traditionally, this has been sort of a left-right paradigm, but in this case, it was actually more of a pragmatic argument. Now, then Eric caught him on it. Ramesh sort of backtracked a little bit, I thought, if you read the follow-up piece, which I think we'll probably link to.
I saw that piece.
Yeah, and let me ask you. I mean, I got the sense that Ramesh was essentially ignoring the first piece he wrote.
Yeah, the only way I could square the two Ramesh posts, because basically the first Ramesh post was, Club for Growth is screwing us. They're shrinking the party. The second post was, hey, I was for Club for Growth when Toomey went after Specter in 2004, so don't challenge my bona fides. And he seemed to be saying that it was different in 2004, that was a legitimate fight to pick, that Toomey could have taken out Specter and won the state, and the political landscape has shifted. And so picking that fight in 2010 was not smart.
If that's the case,
concern.
If that's the case, you just made it more eloquently than he did, because I didn't get that. I've seen other people make that argument, which I don't necessarily buy anyway. But I don't think you really made that. Maybe I need to go back and reread it again.
He didn't make it explicitly.
Okay.
I was sort of reading between the lines of his post.
Gotcha. And then Jim Antle over at American Spectator sort of took middle ground a little bit, basically arguing that, technically speaking, Ramesh may be right. Because of the Club for Growth, there may be more Democrats. But he went on to say that, Pat Toomey didn't... that the problems that Republicans are facing, the reason we're in this whole mess, is not because of the Club for Growth or Pat Toomey. I think he said something like, Pat Toomey didn't say, Brownie, you're doing a heck of a job, He didn't say this either, but Pat Toomey didn't shoot anybody in the face. I mean, yet. So, in any event, we've got an interesting case going on, and the Club for Growth finds itself sort of in the middle of all this. I find it interesting too that Pat Toomey didn't start the Club for Growth. It was
he
sort
was
of
leading it until very recently.
Right. I mean, it was started by other people, and Stephen Moore was, I think, one of the founders and the first president. And no one seems to even notice that. I mean, obviously, when Toomey challenged Specter in 2004, he was supported by the Club for Growth, and he wasn't running it at the time. So that's just an interesting sidebar. But I think the point here is, I mean, not only is it Republicans like Orrin Hatch and Karl Rove and Michael Steele and Voinovich fighting each other, but this ideological and even sort of strategic pragmatic fight, which may or may not have ideological underpinnings. In the case of David Frum, I think it's ideological. In the case of Ramesh versus Eric, I think it's more strategic. But in any event, it's not just being fought out among the top echelons of Republican politicians. This is also taking place in the blogosphere. And I think it's if some people are wringing their hands, I think it's probably healthy. We need to have this ideological fight. You guys had yours. We
had it for a long time.
That's right. And you and Marcos and a lot of other liberal bloggers were essentially arguing that the party will be stronger if it sticks to its moorings and doesn't try to become Republican light. We're having that exact same battle right now, fighting off the squishes in our party.
Though I do think I noticed that in your post, and you've said it on blogging it before, contrasting Specter Toomey to Lamont Lieberman.
Right.
But there is a difference, certainly in Marcos' view. Marcos has always said, he never endorsed any kind of, or covered any primary challenger to, say, Ben Nelson in Nebraska.
Right.
He would always say, hey, Ben Nelson in Nebraska, that's the best we're going to do in Nebraska. he's a pain in the ass, and he's not a reliable Democratic vote, and we need to fight him on the various issues. But running a primary challenger against him, that's insane. And I guess as to Ramesh's point, Specter may be a squish from a conservative point of view, but do you want to challenge him in that state at this time right now? Is that the best use of conservative resources, which is a different argument than what should be the moorings that gird the party?
Right, I think you're right. That's a strategic question, and I think that Ramesh and Eric are legitimately having a disagreement over strategy. But I think most people who are making that argument, they really, how do I put this? It's a convenient argument to talk about pragmatism and strategy. It's really because they believe the party should move to the left and that we're losing because we're too conservative. And conservatives would, I think, rightly argue that no. The problem is that we've had people like George W. Bush who, in compassionate conservatism and big government, and Arlen Specter's, frankly, voting for spending, that people finally got fed up with it. So, different people can disagree, I guess, but it's an interesting debate.
Now, the reaction to the left on Specter was also pretty varied. It was not a uniform, hooray, Democrats are close to 60 votes. Much of the blogosphere is generally chafing at the faction, sort of amorphous faction in the Senate, which are not reliable votes to President Obama's budget priorities. They generally they're giving him agita on global warming, they're giving him agita to a lesser extent on health care. There are folks that made the stimulus bill smaller than Obama wanted, and so they're not. So there's been a long-standing sense that having a D next to your name is not the end-all, be-all in this discussion. So, Aveda Carroll
Specter,
I'm sorry?
Oh, Arlen Specter voted for the Iraq War. You've got other senators like Barbara Mikulski who are not happy that he may be taking seniority, leadership positions because of his seniority or payoffs. And then don't forget the people in Pennsylvania who made this happen. Ed Rendell and the political machine in Pennsylvania. Those same insiders were pushing Hillary Clinton over the insurgent Barack Obama, 6 months ago or whatever. So. I think in that Joe Sestak, I think is his name. He may still stay in the race.
He's trying to hang on, but if President Obama is going to do fundraising for him, I don't imagine that's going to last very long.
So you think
but this is sort of the question now. Does Specter's voting patterns change because he has to respond to a different constituency, certainly in the primary,
right?
And that's a big unknown. Aveda Carroll at the Sideshow, who took the more pessimistic take. Another reminder of Arlen Specter's habit of making really nice-sounding noises about how we should do good things instead of bad things, and then going ahead and voting for the bad things. I have no doubt in my mind that Arlen Specter will now make lots of nice noises about separation of powers while failing to lift a finger to further that aim, in the same way that John McCain was against torture before he voted for it. She then cites Glenn Greenwald at Salon, quote, Arlen Specter is one of the worst, most soulless, most belief-free individuals in politics. The most vividly illustrating what Specter is, prior to the vote on the Military Commissions Act of 2006, he went to the floor of the Senate and said what the bill seeks to do is set back basic rights by some 900 years, and is patently unconstitutional on its face. He then proceeded to vote yes. So there's definitely that concern in the blogosphere, but there are other folks... there are a lot of people who looked at how's this going to affect healthcare, how's this going to affect climate legislation. Joe Rahm at Climate Progress said, as a Republican facing a tough primary challenge from the right, he was a lost vote on global warming legislation. One assumes if he's going to seriously run as a Democrat, he'll support energy and climate bill, that the political calculation changes because of the primary he needs to run in. But other folks like Jesse Jenkins at Wadhead or David Roberts at Grist said, hey, Pennsylvania is still a coal-producing state, and we have a lot of coal state Dems who are being difficult on global warming, and that dynamic does not change because Specter's party affiliation changes. So it's still a big unknown.
Well, there's no doubt. I mean, anybody who...
It changes something, but to the degree that it changes, does it change on these big issues, is less known.
Anybody who clearly Toomey's entry into the primary got him to change his position on card check. Clearly, he changed his party affiliation because of pressure. And this is a guy who is somewhat of a loose cannon, and there were some, I wish I could think of them right now, but some interesting conservative bloggers just were like, hey, he's your problem now. Enjoy. He's going to do to you what he... I forgot to mention Ben Dominic, who's a good blogger and a Red State founder, I think summed up the conservative position on Specter well, which was, he said, by his actions, Specter admits it is he who is out of step with his electoral base, not just in policy but in manner, and only a political move this desperate could bring him any chance at the victory he craves. Unlike Joe Lieberman, Specter didn't wait for his likely rejection in the primary, nor did he take the principled route of registering as a political independent. Instead, he joined the Democrats' winning squad, immediately putting his race at the top of the national list. So, quite a debate taking place. David,
you also had some liberal blogs talking about what does this mean about the state of the Republican Party, and what does this mean about Specter's opportunism?
Right.
Robert Farley at Lawyers, Guns, and Money said, while Specter's defection does create certain problems for the Democrats in 2010, it creates much bigger problems for the Republicans. Specter for the Republicans is not a case of addition by subtraction. He's certainly an opportunist, but political parties in the United States and elsewhere require the services of opportunists in order to survive and prosper. When the opportunists start jumping ship, it indicates serious problems. So I wonder how do conservatives think that they can rebuild on idealism alone?
Well, I will say this, and there's a quote that's been attributed to Newt Gingrich. From '94. I have to check and see if it's really him. But it's first we have to plow the field, then we have to plant the crops, and then finally we'll harvest. And I think that's where we are right now.
It's a back to square one moment.
Exactly. This is like a baseball team or a football team that goes through a rebuilding process. Sometimes you have to get rid of some of your old players who are hanging on to a bygone era, and sometimes you take a step back, and you bring in some young talent, and sometimes those old veterans have a lot of fans, and sometimes those old veterans still are pretty good ball players, but they're culturally or their attitudes just don't jibe with the new program. So I think this is a rebuilding process, and there are fans who are upset because we just let Eddie Murray go to the Dodgers or something.
I guess what I don't understand is, I felt the Democrats had a whole lot of deadwood. I think they still have a lot of deadwood. A lot of the folks, the Democrats in Congress, are still old bulls. There's not that much new blood that has come in at the congressional level. The new blood's at the top, and it's that deadwood that was always making these very poor, politically strategic choices under the guise of this is the politically pragmatic, moderate thing to do.
Yep.
But the Republican Party, Specter is the last of a dying breed of Republican moderates. The party is still dominated by rock-ribbed conservatives. So, what's the deadwood that you're trying to clear out here?
Well, I think Arlen Specter. But I would actually...
Those guys are largely cleared out. You're down to, Collins and Snow. You've done that job.
I know. I would actually argue over how conservative some of these people are. Look at the people who are criticizing the Club for Growth right now. And I'm not suggesting we go after... Don't get me wrong, I'm not suggesting we go after Voinovich. But let me say this, though. If somebody wants to run against Voinovich, good luck to him. I don't have a problem with that. He's retiring, I think, right, anyway?
Yeah, I think so.
Or in Hatch, for that matter, or this list of people who've been critical of Toomey or the Club for Growth. I think primaries are healthy. Arlen Specter made a decision. He didn't have to get out. He could have fought it out in the Republican primary. Last time he claims that nobody wants to help him, or that the conservative parties moved the Republican parties moved too far to the right and nobody will help him. Well, last time I think Rick Santorum and Tom Ridge and George W. Bush and Dick Cheney frankly put their reputations at stake to help Arlen Specter get reelected because they thought it was pragmatic, and look where it got them. So,
should we shift gears to the other big news story this week?
Yeah, I'm getting worked.
The
North
American flu.
Yeah,
I will not say swine flu. That is verboten.
Why?
What's that?
Why is it verboten?
Because our pork products are still good.
Oh, okay.
Our bacon is still safe.
I will do my part.
I think the pork producers were going nuts that everyone was saying that, thinking they couldn't have their pork, and they can.
I will go have a ham sandwich right after this. I promise you.
Forgive me for not burying my nose in expert public health bloggers. There is a very active public health blogging scene, and I am not a public health expert. I wasn't astute enough to catch up on what they were doing. But as far as the political ramifications are concerned, I think a couple interesting things happening on the left. One was folks really jumped into action to peg Susan Collins in particular for actively cutting pandemic flu funding in the stimulus package, mocking at the time as being ridiculous. Had nothing to do with economic stimulus. John Nichols at The Nation, tagged not just Susan Collins but Karl Rove for that, and noting at the end of his piece that a little bit of money was retained on the federal level, but state aid to fight pandemic flus was totally zeroed out, and there's been some coverage.
Now,
I'm sorry?
Maybe you're going to get to this, but I believe I heard that Schumer was also supportive of this, so it's a bipartisan decision.
I think with Schumer, though, and I could be mistaken, I don't think Schumer was leading the fight to knock it out.
Right.
But once the issue got bubbled up to the surface, Schumer's, I think, some of the deadwood that we're talking about.
All right, well, let me make the other point, which is we're not having a problem with a lack of money or supplies. As Barack Obama said, we've got...
That's not necessarily the case. There's been some reporting that the state budgets on this are shaky. Right now, they seem okay, but if this grows, it's unclear whether states have the resources to properly resist. So if
we shall see,
get out of hand, this might become a larger political problem for those that cut the funding.
Maybe.
And Schumer, jumped on that. I think he jumped on the bandwagon. I don't think he was a leader. I could be wrong. But he definitely came out publicly, lumped it into the pork pile that other conservatives were doing. So, I think he gets smacked on the wrist, too.
Some of it did get saved, right, in the federal bill.
I mean, there was almost $900 million slotted originally. It got knocked all the way back to $50 million. That $50 million is just on the federal level, so there's nothing on the state level. So, again, if the states end up being fiscally strapped, if this grows more, then you're going to see Susan Collins having a hard time. Because Susan Collins is saying, hey, I'm for it. I fought for it before. I didn't think it was part of stimulus. Well, that's not going to, making this sort of procedural argument is not going to fly if, states are strapped and the money needed to be there imminently. And just to bring this back to blogging, you had blogs like Fire Dog Lake. You had... trying to find the other blog that was really pushing it hard. Forgive me. I already mentioned John Nichols at The Nation. I think there are other blogs too. They did a pretty good job of putting Collins on her heels to the point where she had to respond publicly, and Politico picked up her defenses. So it's a case where blog criticism actually made a politician dance.
Right.
And so it's something that always I think is worth noting.
On the conservative side, obviously, Joe Biden, had his comment about don't get on the metro or the subway or airplanes or anything. And an underrated blogger named Dan Flynn, who blogs, I think it's danflynn.com, wrote, Joe Biden cautioned America against traveling on airplanes or subway cars today because of the swine flu. Keep in mind that the swine flu, the verboten word, the swine flu has killed just one person in America, a baby who was likely caught the malady in Mexico, in this go-round. More than 500,000 Americans have died of AIDS. Will Biden also tell Americans to refrain from gay sex? So, that's the...
Actually, I mean, I think Biden's comments were probably wrong, but that's a totally ridiculous parallel. Because Biden would say you should practice
let me give you the next. Let me give you the next.
That's
line.
relevant.
The next line maybe is more politically correct, which is, there are more than 40,000 deaths on the road every year. Should we ban automobiles? So, you get the point here. And then clearly, Joe Biden was off message today, and conservative blogs are pointing that out.
Now, Ezra Klein actually came to Biden's defense. I don't know if I don't think it's been a blog-wide defense of Biden, but I thought Ezra's blog was notable. Biden may be right to induce a bit of panic. The United States Travel Association won't think so. It's their profit stream on the line after all, but epidemiologists are probably quite relieved by the vice president's comments. If one person has the flu, then on average base reproduction rate measures how many people will catch the flu from him. Lowering that rate is key to pandemic response. And lowering that rate requires things like forcing or urging people to limit contacts, encouraging hand washing or other personal hygiene, or promoting the use of face masks.
And by the way, let me say this. Someday, somebody's going to ask me, tell me something that you agree with Barack Obama on. And I will say, hand washing. I couldn't agree with him more. In fact, I love that Purell hand sanitizer stuff. And there are cool stores, at least here in Northern Virginia and D.C., when you go into like a Whole Foods or something, or even like at the checkout or when you walk in, they have, and I think Chick-fil-A does this now too, they have Purell. I think all stores, I don't want to mandate this or anything, but if I were a business owner, I love that idea. And so I think we should encourage that, and washing hands is good. And it's scary when you see people not do that.
We will look back 10 years from now and say America's a cleaner place, thanks to Barack Obama. I almost, and this is being sort of treated as a Biden gaffe. You wonder if maybe he actually did it intentionally, because it's the kind of thing that a politician's not supposed to say, because you don't want to induce a panic. But you wonder if maybe they just wanted to get that out a little bit. Make people think twice about doing travel without it being considered an official line from the White House. That
is actually very devious and conspiratorial. I'm proud of you.
Thank you.
So anyway, yes, that's a big news one today. And I think you had one more to hit, right?
Well, I mean, Obama's press conference on the 100-day mark, I was actually sort of surprised he had a press conference because he really didn't have a lot of news to give.
The third one, I think.
Third one in 4 months. So he's definitely pushing the limits, I think, on. For the most part, I've not been one to play armchair quarterback about their media strategy. It's they always overexpose. He's doing too much. He's cheapening the office, because obviously everything he's done on the PR front has worked, flawlessly. But I was a little surprised. Usually you do a press conference when you actually have a message that you want to push in some way. And there really wasn't an overarching message except to fill the space of the 100-day coverage, which I think they did. I mean, most of the 100-day coverage was pretty positive for them. But torture was, if there was a dominant issue, it was torture. And some liberal blogs were not thrilled with the nuance in his responses. Blogger goes by Creature at the blog The Reaction. I do think it's worth noting that no matter how pressed, the president still would not call the Bush administration's ordering of waterboarding a crime. He called it a mistake. Surely disappointing, but I don't believe he's closing the door whatsoever to prosecutions. But it's not in his interest to appear too zealous as we travel towards that road. Christy Harden-Smith, another Fiery Dog Lake blogger, so I think Obama misses the point. This should not and cannot be a question of politics, although acknowledging that he's trying to walk a tightrope between political landmines being laid for him by Cheney apologists. So there's that little tension that he has with some in the liberal base on that issue. The other notable thing I thought was Obama's anecdote regarding Churchill, which he cited in an article.
Right.
He didn't say who the article was from. And folks figured out that it actually came from Andrew Sullivan, who, Con Carroll and I used to debate, how we should classify Sullivan. He would call Sullivan a liberal, and I would totally reject him from joining the club. But he's definitely been an Obama fan. And so it's been confirmed. I think Huffington Post did it. I think Mark Amador of The Atlantic did it. Confirmed that Obama got that from Sullivan's blogging, and that Obama reads Sullivan regularly. So that's notable in and of itself. I think in conjunction with David Axelrod publicly praising David Brooks, it shows the level of outreach that they do to right-of-center pundits.
I would
to help
come.
them expand their appeal.
They should invite us in. They should invite us in. I tell you what, Bush never had, that I know of, conservative bloggers into the White House. I think there was something with him at one point. He would have, he had conservative journalists, like, who wrote for National Review or something, but not bloggers per se.
Well, and Obama's outreach to liberal bloggers has often been criticized as being almost non-existent. While there were bloggers felt that Obama, completely shut them out during the campaign, I think there's been more outreach since the election. But it's never. I mean, he's had a lot of online outreach. He's known for all the social networking that he's done, but reaching out to the select group of leading Netroots figures has never been Obama's main game.
Yeah, Bill Clinton did that. When was it that Bill Clinton had that sort of famous meeting with bloggers?
I was at that famous meeting.
Oh wow!
That was September 2006. You can see the very dorky photos online somewhere.
But what was the occasion?
There was no stated occasion for that. That was more, I think, Peter Dow was working for Clinton at the time. It was before Hillary Clinton announced her presidential run. So I think Peter Dow at that point was working for the Clinton Foundation, and later he joined the Hillary Clinton for President campaign. And Peter always had a vision that he wrote about trying to strengthen the ties between the Netroots and the political establishment to have better influence over the discourse. That you needed that alliance, or else it was all just pissing in the wind. So to basically, Clinton famously never even used email when he was at the White House as president. He's not known as someone who's been technologically on the cutting edge. So for Peter to help bring about that meeting was sort of seen as an advancement in the Democratic political establishment recognizing the value of bloggers as part of the discourse. Because we still got a lot of flack for being sort of the riffraff and the unwashed and not having any political sense, yada yada yada. But a lot of us got flack for doing that, meaning that we were getting co-opted and we're all going to be, kissing up for the Hillary campaign, and it was all being bought up. I think you can look at those of us that win. I think very few of us were Hillary sycophants, in the campaign. So it was an off-the-record conversation. There wasn't any specific topics or rationale for it. That's my own speculation. I think why the meeting came about. But it did, and I think it did speak to a symbolic shift of understanding in the political establishment what blogs are able to do. But Obama's reaching out to Sullivan and David Brooks, I think, is something different. It's more recognition that he needs to cultivate the middle in some way. And as much as I have argued that the middle ideologically is not all that far off from the left. There's just difference in style and tone and nuance in political positions, but it's somewhat of a natural marriage. The Obama team wants to have some outreach to sort of the symbolic figures of the center-right, and Brooks and Sullivan, I think, are the best representations of that. And clearly he's doing it. I would note on top of that...
By the way, I ran into Brooks on the street.
Yeah.
The other day. Luckily, he didn't know who I am because he would have probably hit me. But he's a very nice guy. And I was wearing an Orioles hat, and we talked baseball for a while. I was impressed. I was actually very impressed with how nice he was. Maybe I was co-opted, by David
Because,
Brooks.
I mean, if you don't treat David Frum as a real conservative, who knows what you think about David Brooks?
Yeah, I mean, maybe David Frum and I could, go and, play tennis together, and, maybe he's a great guy. Maybe me and Mark Douthat and David Brooks and Kathleen Parker could go bowling.
But I should add, though, that Mike Tomansky, who writes for The Guardian, and Michael Scher, who was Time Magazine and blogs at their blog Swampland, called out Obama for saying that anecdote about Churchill. I mean, not that the anecdote was wrong, that Churchill did say that Britain did not torture, but that in reality Britain did torture, despite what Churchill said.
And even today, I mean, if you go, if you get arrested in England, you could sit there for a month, right, before they have to, give you a hearing or bring you before a judge. I mean,
I don't think their civil liberties are what it is.
Oh, they don't have.
In America. But this was talking about
Rights.
British torture in the World War II era.
Sure.
I don't know. They weren't charging Britain with torture, in the Iraq War.
Right.
So it's possible that some conservatives pick up on this to say, Obama once again makes a political gaffe. I think it's more or less into don't read Andrew Sullivan religiously. Just because he has styled himself in the mythical political center doesn't mean he always knows what he's talking about.
Well, the other point that I actually made on Twitter last night was it's ironic that Obama sort of references Churchill because there was a sort of a mini scandal when Obama gave the Churchill bust back to England that George W. Bush had in the White House.
Right.
And there were a lot of...
It was all a flutter.
Yeah, I mean, there was some talk about that, so I thought it was interesting at least that he referenced Churchill.
So it's more about trying to make nice with Britain again.
Maybe.
So I think that's all we got. This is more you have to add on the torture business.
I think we're good to go. I'm going to keep an eye on this pound teacut thing, which I think will be interesting. And
will you still be using the hashtag after today?
Yeah, I plan on it. I think that conservatives will keep it, and like I said, I think that maybe years from now it'll be one of those things like why are people doing that? And you'll find the old guy like, "Son, back in my day, there was this top conservatives on Twitter." There's stuff all the time that we say like okay, right? Obama says okay, like the teacher on South Park. By the way, he doesn't say okay. It's like okay. Mm-hmm. But we say okay all the time, and it comes from old Kinderhook, right? Nobody knows that. We just say it.
I did not know that.
Yes. So nobody knows what it stands for. It's actually like a political slogan. And so maybe Pound Teacot will become the okay of Twitterland.
Fascinating. So just to recap, you're going to use TCOT still.
Yes.
You're going to eat pork.
Yes.
You're going to ride subways, and you're going to fly.
I actually take the Metro all the time. I'm a big fan of the DC Metro. I'm going to do all that stuff. In fact, I might do it simultaneously. Eating a sandwich, eating a pork sandwich on on the Metro while doing Pound Teacot. And we'll put it on YouTube.
Excellent.
All right.
We'll talk to you soon.
That's the news. I am out of here. Thanks, Bill.
Take care.